Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guest colleagues, also from my end, very good morning. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for your engagement and contribution yesterday. The next segment of this program is actually perfect extension of, I think, what was a wonderful presentation by Naki. We call him Naki, by the way, so don't take the trouble to try to spell his difficult name when we talk to him. And that is about this century, that is about his question, what will happen in 2050? Now, many of you have read the book of Susan Hockfield, former MIT president, which is called The Age of Biology. As much as 19th century was the engineering century, steam engines started the evolution of the economy and well-being. Last century, it was mainly physics, chemistry, and IT technologies, which has driven us to the well-being we are now. It will be convergence between the living system, which by the way HFSPO is supporting, and engineering in the age of biology. All the way from bioremediation, biopharma, biorobotics, to the last big hit, which is organoid computing, which hit the grounds last couple of months. How would that develop? What kind of basic science is needed to support the development? Already now, about 20% of the global economy is sitting in the bio-driven development. By 2030, 30% of global GDP will be sitting in that. And how is that going to be harnessed to support the issue of sustainable development? What kind of connections and bridges we need to make between the age of biology and sustainability challenges like climate, energy, oceans, and food security? We have a distinguished panel this morning which will be addressing these very fundamental questions, which are both at the heart of the core mission of the Human Frontier Science Program Organization, but also at the heart of the future of this planet regarding both the economy and well-being of the humans. I would like to welcome again this morning, since yesterday, Marcia McNutt. She doesn't need much introduction, just briefly. She's currently president of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States. She has been before engaged in many of these science and science-driven positions, including leading of the US Geological Service. Marcia has been with this community for a long, long time, and we are very privileged to have you here, Marcia, today with us. We have Mona Nemer. Mona Nemer is Chief Science Advisor to the Government of Canada, and by training, she's actually a life scientist, biologist, so I think from her position, both in terms of thinking about strategies, how to harness the age of biology for all those functions, and from her professional background, she will be making her comments and contribution. Last but not least, we have Amy Rowat. Amy is not a Chief Science Advisor. She is not a president of the Academy as yet, but she is one of the grantees of HFSPO. And from her position, being the eminent young career scientist, she would converse and address this particular panel. So I would like to welcome you all again and ask Marcia McNutt to make their introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Pavel, and it's a pleasure to be addressing this very distinguished audience. So I found it rather remarkable that myself as a geophysicist would be asked to comment on the age of biology and the future of life sciences. But then it occurred to me that because this is not my field, I'm perhaps an independent arbiter that's not going to have any one favorite area of biology. So I quickly put together a list of what I think are some of the breakthrough technologies that we need to watch in the future and that could be very important for sustainability and climate change. So here's my list in no particular order. Let me start out with synthetic biology. The opportunity that we could actually genetically engineer novel organisms that we don't even have right now that could potentially produce biofuels and in the process consume or sequester CO2 and perhaps even other pollutants. I think that's an exciting possibility. Number 2 on my list, use gene editing like CRISPR-Cas9 or something like that to speed up species adaptation to a changing climate such that they preserve their ability to provide the ecosystem services upon which we all depend, and also retain biodiversity on the planet. Third on my list is to develop gene drives, which we're already doing now in a limited manner, to control invasive species and pests, thus making agriculture more productive with less food waste and not all the negative impacts from uses of herbicides and pesticides. Fourth on my list is to fabricate biodegradable plastics that might actually, when they disintegrate, be good for the ocean and good for the planet because they actually provide food, fertilizer, etc. And then last on my list, but not least, is protein hacking. Maybe some of you as well saw the recent article in Nature technology feature on how scientists are hacking the genetic code to give proteins new power. Currently, we're limited to just 20 amino acids, which are the building blocks for proteins. But imagine if we had entirely new building blocks that could be created. To date, applications in this area have been exploratory, but I think the applications are possibly endless as we expand to use them for sustainability and climate change. Now, in giving you this list, I want to say quite emphatically that I don't think any of these technologies are inherently good or inherently evil. They just are. And it's how society decides to use them that will determine whether it's net benefit or net negative. And I'm not sure that we are actually smart enough to understand what some of the drawbacks are of these technologies. I went back to look at what people proposed would be the drawbacks of the internet or drawbacks of social media. And it was particularly hard for the internet because it was before the internet that people were coming up with these ideas. But in any case, what was true in all of these cases is people looked at the drawbacks by looking in the rearview mirror of what had happened in the past and what they feared they were going to lose, rather than truly forward-looking as to how society was going to change with these new technologies. So I'm not sure we are smart enough right now to look into the future and decide what will be the concerns about these. But I will say there is one good example when the scientific society came together to do this. This was back in 1975 when recombinant DNA was new. And a group of 140 scientists met at Asilomar in California, and they worked out what is probably the best example of using the precautionary principle in launching a new, scary, and unknown technology. And I think we should take a page out of that book in looking at some of these new applications of life sciences in deciding how we can go forward in a cautious and safe way so that they do benefit humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Marcia. Thank you. I think many points which we could discuss later, important points. Thank you so much. Can I go to you, Mana?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, Marcia, for stealing my points as well. So now I have to improvise, but I fully agree with the points made, and maybe I'll just step back a little bit and mention that I was actually trained in chemistry. My PhD was in bioorganic chemistry. I worked on the synthesis of RNA at a time when people said, who will ever need to use synthetic RNA? And my supervisor almost lost his grant because of that. So after that, I got interested in biology, mainly due to the potential of RNA interference and antisense RNA work at the time. And I mention this because I think we need to remember that the major advances in biology have been due to advances in other fields, whether it's chemistry, whether it's physics. I mean, we can think about very powerful imaging techniques in addition to everything that you have mentioned in terms of genetic engineering. And I think it's just like opened an unbelievable wealth of possibilities, and it has accelerated discovery. So there's been this very sort of virtuous circle between technology and advances in biology, which has brought us to where we are. And of course, we've seen the importance of all this in the health field. And we're on the cusp of starting to see the importance in the field of sustainability and climate and biodiversity. I mean, think about the possibilities of engineering proteins for environmental remedy, changing coral reefs to withstand more heat, etc., etc. So, and then of course, we have the power of data, digital AI. Now we can get the structure of how many hundreds of proteins just like that, and then develop targets for them to cure human diseases or treat human diseases or prevent human diseases. So all this to say that it's sort of limitless what can happen in the future. And faced with this inability of predicting where the applications are going to be and the uncertainties, I think it has profound implications for how scientists need to interact with the rest of society, whether we're talking about the public or about the policymakers, the political front. And I think that it's really important, of course, to empower people to make decisions for themselves about the applications, the use of these technologies. They're the end users themselves, but this cannot be an afterthought. We have to bring people along from the beginning in the co-development, and we have to be transparent about uncertainties, about what we know, what we don't know, which is why science literacy has to be a priority for all of us. In the absence of science literacy of the public, we're going to see increased disinformation, and we're going to miss out on the societal application of many of the discoveries and many of the technological development. I would say that science advice itself is going to become very tricky. As a science advisor, you have to stick to the facts, to the science. You have to provide the knowns and the unknowns. It's not your job to incorporate what the public wants or not. What you can incorporate is science from behavioral science, from other areas of science. But the policymakers are going to be increasingly sensitive to what the public thinks, what the public appetite is for. And I can tell you this based on the experience of the COVID pandemic. When the public was just past COVID, didn't want to hear anything about COVID, whether people were still being hospitalized, whether people were still unvaccinated, it became very hard to get the attention of on the political front, against the evidence that we still have to be dealing with COVID. So I say this because it's like a cautionary tale that if we don't bring the public along from the very beginning, like many of what we believe in terms of science, in terms of evidence for policy, is just going to be actually impossible to work with. And all the great hopeful message that Naki showed us may just like become, you know, a mirage. So I would just like to invite us all to realize the importance of communicating with the public from the get-go. And communicating is not lecturing, it's a two-way dialogue, listening from the get-go on an ongoing basis, not during crisis, and make this as much a priority as it is for the discovery that we do in our labs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Listening to you, it's a fascinating mix of opportunity and challenge, and actually a little bit of fear as well. So we have to discuss it, I think, later. Thank you both. Amy.
Thank you. Good morning. It's such an honor to be here today. So I'll bring sort of the faculty perspective. I'm trained as a physicist and engineer and now in a biology department. And I think much of that trajectory was really shaped by HFSP and my cross-disciplinary fellowship, which really gave me the privilege to attend some of my most favorite ever and inspiring meetings, where I really saw the power of being able to use different disciplinary approaches to really enable beautiful science. So building on what Mona and Marcia have already said, I mean, I think we all recognize there's really great, amazing opportunities for innovations in the life sciences to address some of these major societal challenges. And I think especially the convergence between biology and engineering really has exciting potential to really unlock the power of biotechnology also to solve some of these challenges. So I won't go more onto the opportunities. I think we all recognize there's exciting opportunities, but I think the threat, the public understanding of science, to build on previous comments, that there's a really real challenge that a significant fraction of the general public, especially in my country of not of birth, but I'm from Canada originally, but in the U.S. right now and around the world, that don't believe the rationale that drives scientific advances to address some of these challenges. For example, take attitudes towards climate change that you can see revealed in a recent Pew survey, for example. This is a really real problem for proposing creative research solutions, for example, to engineer plants that can more efficiently produce biomass, or genetically modified organisms that can help to produce proteins more efficiently for food or health applications. Public acceptance is going to be absolutely critical for any solution to actually have impact. What's really even scarier, I think, is some of the pushback against science in the form of harassment against scientists. So speaking out to the media, for example, in the case of COVID, as detailed in a 2021 piece in Nature, 15% of scientists experienced death threats after speaking about COVID-19 to the media or posting in social media. So this, I think, is a very real challenge. So how do we deal with this and evolve the academic enterprise into the 21st century? I think diversity is really key in ensuring we have representation that truly embraces diversity in socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, disciplinary backgrounds, provides a learning environment where all students can thrive, and also faculty and investigators as well. Of course, we need to train the next generation of citizens to how to think critically, how to disentangle misinformation from science, and I think this is a really key role of the academic enterprise here. One way to promote this can be teaching classes that really teach critical thinking skills also to non-science majors, using approaches that integrate different disciplines so that students can develop and train in taking a problem-based approach and using different disciplines, being conversant with students from other backgrounds, for example, from engineering, from chemistry, from public health, from behavioral sciences. Graduate programs also can be built around that. We've done something like this at UCLA that involves science communicators interacting with the chemists and the engineers and the life sciences. So I think, also, I think supporting and incentivizing community engagement, I think, will be really key as well. Marcia and I talked about this a little bit, that, and also, as you mentioned yesterday, that community-driven research, I think, is a really promising approach that naturally engages community members and to identify the problem and get excited about solving and identifying solutions. And engaging community with science also involves promoting dialogue, across disciplines and across universities. To achieve this goal, I founded an organization at UCLA, Science and Food, and we've used sort of public events to instigate discussion involving scientists, food visionaries, policymakers, chefs as well, which has really kind of brought in general audiences to discuss some of these time-sensitive issues, such as food waste and the impact of food on environment. I'm happy to talk more about that in another context. But I think funding agencies also can play a role in helping to restructure and incentivize public impact. So, for example, the National Science Foundation's proposals that require a broader impact section, I think, has been really transformative in academic culture. But I think community engagement really remains largely underappreciated at the institutional level, notably for promotion and tenure cases, which is really poses a challenge for young faculty to even get excited about, engaging more with the public. My own institution recently launched Public Impact Awards, which I think can help to celebrate faculty that are actually achieving public impact and being involved with the community. So to sum up, I think, there's many exciting opportunities that we can address from the life sciences into the future, but many challenges, of course, to discuss, and look forward to that continued conversation.
Thank you so much, and also for your nice words about HFSP support. Thank you so much. I think there are many, many important questions which we should discuss, and will, probably not all today. One which I would like to ask you, coming actually from all three interventions in different way expressed, we don't know really what this opportunity will mean, right? We don't know what this will be in 2040, 2050. We cannot know, we can only make scenarios. But you all say indirectly that we somehow would like to keep control of it. Even not knowing the future, we would like somehow to keep control of it. So I'm just comparing with AI. We are now everywhere in the world frantically trying to establish rules and regulations. But I think we are late, because the speed of the development of that field is so fast that probably we will not be able to catch up anymore the way we want it. Don't you think this is happening also in the age of biology? Don't you think that all the convergence developments, starting from Genentech and La Roche, but going to the biorobotics, are already beyond the point we as a society, with all the stakeholders, which you mentioned, actually can get a hold of and can regulate a little bit the way we would like to regulate. So are we not late already for that particular purpose? Marcia, maybe you start, I will just listen.
Yes, so I remember back to the days of the Cold War when everyone was concerned about nuclear Armageddon. What we had going for us at that time was that nuclear technology required such large facilities and such a huge investment that we didn't worry about, a rogue individual actor being able to pull off a first strike. I think some of the issues that we're facing in this new era of biology, and to some extent with AI as well, is that we have greatly lowered the threshold of the investment in the facilities needed to pull off some of these, some of this hacking of life. And so I am concerned that we are entering a new era where technological innovation is going to be too easily within the reach of bad actors, and it's going to be very, very difficult to control. And so I'm not sure I have a solution to it, but I do think that scientists need to be out in the forefront in, saying what is acceptable and what isn't. And that's not going to necessarily stop someone from doing something bad, but if we can anticipate ahead of time who those people might be, at least we can build defenses against it.
Thank you. Mona, would you like to comment?
You know, it's difficult to regulate what you don't know. And this is why my colleagues in the legal field have told me that it's very difficult to be proactive in these areas. However, what we can do is to agree ahead of time on principles and on ethical frameworks for both the research and the use of new knowledge, new science, new technologies, because I agree that everything that we're looking at, you know, the magnificence of everything is actually potentially dual use. And increasingly, we're going to have philanthropists, industrialists, states invest in science, invest in technology development, and that can skew things. So I think that we need to, as a society, to really develop processes and frameworks that are applicable to many of these, you know, discoveries and technologies that we don't know where they're going to lead us. And then, of course, be prepared to legislate, to regulate certain things once we know how they're, you know, going to be used. But otherwise, it's going to be either a free-for-all, or we're going to completely stifle research and development. And let's remember the past, the very, you know, le passé proche. Look what happened in countries that tried to ban, for example, stem cell research or reproductive technologies. You know, other countries gained those researchers and those technologies. On the other hand, when we decided that we're not going to do human cloning, when that happened, then there was a global outcry with consequences to bad actors. So I think that we need to strike the appropriate balance in all this, but something has to be done.
In the precautionary way. Yeah, thank you. Amy, would you like to comment on that point?
I mean, I think, yeah, I fully agree with this, yeah, establishing framework, and I think just to build on that in your previous element in your question about, you know, how do we, I think scientific literacy is really important in this this conversation as well, especially in communicating to general audiences that science is a very evolving, dynamic field as well. And so I think that can result in misperceptions when, you know, people are used to learning facts and textbooks, and really I think we saw this with the rapid evolution of mRNA vaccines, for example. Even our understanding of COVID-19 transmission mechanisms, that it was, I think we need to emphasize that knowledge is dynamic and ever-changing, and that that it can't be expected to have, you know, the solutions, the answers that are going to be sort of ingrained for forever, that we need to be, yeah, kind of promoting more of a dynamic mindset, I guess, around science and new technologies.
Thank you. I think for us, as the Human Frontier Science Organization, there is a very pertinent question which follows on this discussion. Obviously, the very fast innovation chain, which goes from the fundamental discovery to the application, is now very short. As yesterday we discussed it, we don't go anymore through this years and years. Sometimes it jumps over even in the first idea, and there is the innovation in the bioconvergence. At which stage of this cycle a regulatory framework should start? Are there any implications for organizations like ours, which is based on a complete freedom of the human mind? We support the best of the best to create ideas, but we don't have any control of anything about what happened to that. And let me tell you, from our scientists who are supported, many of the ideas which were never meant to be practical end up on the tables of the major innovative companies. Genentech is full with HFSPO alumni, so is La Roche, etc., etc. So what would you advise us to do, if anything, at the level of the organization which is looking for the best minds of the world, giving them freedom to discover, but not having any principles of any control of what will happen with that? Marcia.
Yeah, so As you were talking, something occurred to me that we both need to, as scientists, look ahead and try to come up with a framework to control some of these technologies. But I think at the same time, we have to include the public in this. We have to understand what are their hopes and dreams and aspirations, what sort of principles they want to see come out. And so we have to do that. And one way to do that, to get people comfortable with this, is to figure out what is the equivalent of citizen science for some of these new biological interventions that could be done. As a geoscientist, which is a field in which citizen science has been incredibly impactful. I remember when I was director of the USGS, we did put out an app for your cell phone that would allow people to input data on phenology. When are your tulips blooming? When are the leaves turning on your trees? And we could have people start doing this, and after about 15 years, it was really clear in the data that spring was coming earlier, fall was happening later, and this wasn't something that scientists just told them was happening. It was something that they could see from their friends and neighbors. And so I could go to a congressman and say, he would say, oh, I think you scientists are all, changing the data or biased in your interpretation. And I'd say, well, here's a plot from people in your congressional district, and here's what they have found. And by the way, these blue dots are from your mother's cell phone. So you get something like that, and then people understand that this isn't something that scientists are trying to push on people. And I think we need to think carefully about what would be the citizen science equivalent for some of these new biological technologies and get them involved in helping us find solutions.
Thank you. I think it's a very interesting suggestion in the context. Thank you. Mona.
I completely agree. Participatory science and research holds, I think, great promise in the rapprochement between the population and science, not just scientists. For an organization like the Human Science Frontier Program, I think that including lay people on peer review committees, in addition to the general ethical framework, might be something interesting to consider. And I can tell you very candidly that several years ago I would have laughed at such a suggestion, but I've seen it actually work extremely well in the health field. And if we talk about sustainability, biodiversity, climate, I think these are areas where the public, by their participation, the public will learn more, will hear things, and they will contribute also. So they will be full contributors, then they become also ambassadors. So I think something like this can be actually quite interesting to implement, but I think a solid ethical framework about the research, and harm and the misuse, etc., has to be in place. Scientists can't control who's going to misuse the research once it's published, but they sure have to abide themselves by these principles.
I think both excellent suggestions. Definitely my colleagues are listening very carefully what we could do. Amy, how would you respond? Because you are grantee, how would you respond to such a development?
I think those are great ideas. I think one caution would be just to carefully curate and consider how one selects those participants, right? Any community members that might be participating might be ones that naturally have free time or the resources to have childcare or a job that's only 9 to 5. So tapping into, in some countries, socioeconomic disparities are greater than others, but I think in considering in providing resources and supporting community members to participate, I think, is a wonderful idea. And I could envision you could sort of use that to guide even a community agreement or help the community members to drive what's acceptable and what they feel is ethical.
Thank you. For the last part, I would like to turn to the probably most complex but also controversial potentially part of the discussion, which is the human cognition, human behavior, how our brains respond to the challenge of the sustainability. Marcia, if you allow me, I remember years ago, I don't know where it was, but I was in the audience, you were speaking. You spoke about Katrina disaster. And I remember there was one slide you showed, where you showed that there were people on the roofs of their houses which were flooded. And some of them refused to step on the helicopter, stay there. And then you explain why. Because at that time, the federal regulation of US didn't allow these people to take their pets, their cats and dogs with it. That picture stayed in my mind ever since, because that shows how important it is to understand the social, human, behavioral dimension of the equation. Yeah. Sorry to say that, but as you remember that slide, I hope you still do in this context. So, how this age of biology could help us to actually move finally in our behavior, cognitive, rational, emotional, to walk the talk of sustainability. Where would you see the major opportunity? Yesterday we saw two presentations at the last session which were to that. So what could be the benefit of age of biology for moving human brains and behavior to the right direction?
Well, one area that I think is really ripe for adjusting human behavior is to start out with some of these biological interventions with the concept of equity in everything we do. And I'll tell you, if I hear of one more billionaire who wants to use these new biological tools to become immortal, I'm really going to have to scream. You hear of all these very rich people who invest in biology for the sake of increasing their own lifespan, even if it comes at the expense of other people, you know, like blood doping, having transfusions of blood from young people so that you feel and act younger. So I think if we start with the concept of equity, and we aren't going to understand equity until we talk to people and we find out from the people being left behind as well as the people who are going ahead. And I think that's sort of similar to the issue from Katrina, where I think the civil service people thought that they were doing the right thing by saying to people, no, we want to preserve space in the shelters for humans, and not realizing that by excluding their pets, they were signing a death sentence for those people.
Thank you so much. Mona?
I think there are many, many lessons to be learned in terms of the use of behavioral sciences and communication sciences from the pandemic. And I'll just give you some examples. Again, understanding the limitation of the physical environment of people's lifestyle on their decisions is hugely important. So when we started looking at why are people not wanting to get tested initially for COVID, well, it was all the consequences of being tested positive, and mostly for vulnerable populations, the ones who didn't have a place to isolate from their family, the ones who had actually to go and work because they needed that paycheck, the ones who had no one else who would care for their children. So once we started understanding all this, we developed the appropriate policy interventions like sick leave, paid sick leave, etc., etc. But then, so that was one thing, understanding, communicating back that this is not a punishment, that you don't have to be ashamed, if you got infected and so on. And then there was the other part, which was behavioral change to adopt prevention. And as the experts on my COVID committee kept reminding us, that there is the science of behavior then there is the science of behavioral change, which are two completely different things. And I think we really need to understand this and understand why people will or will not adopt change, and just help them along the way. But we have a lot to gain from having the behavioral sciences, the communication sciences around the table with the technology, with the biology, so that we can go from discovery to end use in an equitable manner, and in a manner that science is truly to the benefit of everyone.
Thank you so much. And again, I think we are learning from this conversation for HFSPO future. Amy?
Just to quickly build on that and finish, I think, yeah, the behavioral science is really key. In my own work, we've benefited immensely from working with behavioral scientists to understand, for example, factors that drive people's food choices. So I think that will be absolutely critical into the future. That will also help to guide how we as scientists can best communicate and most effectively communicate for maximum consumer adoption, or that just people will accept and uptake a new innovation. And I think community engagement and participatory research is another way to achieve that goal as well, to really understand what communities are looking for. And some colleagues of mine recently, UCLA built up a new neuroscience center, that are now sort of building on inspirations from community members that really they want to understand mechanisms of intergenerational trauma, and so that is a great way to engage a community in wanting to know more about epigenetics, for example. So I think the combination of these two factors would be important moving forward.
Pavel, if I can just
Yes.
add one quick thing about language. When we talk about communication and cultural sensitive understanding and so on, I think we have to be careful. We're all speaking English here. Science is being conducted in English, and then some words are being translated to other languages. And I give you a recent example from Canada, where we were talking about water contaminants, and contaminants were translated for the indigenous communities to poison. So
Yeah.
that was like a surprise to many of us. So I think that we, as we think about this international also collaboration and science for the benefits of all and science literacy, I think language is also going to be extremely important to bear in mind.
And including the
Tomoni, are you in the
indigenous people
room?
as
You
science.
listen to this,
That's right.
Yesterday we had a one page on the language side of it. That was interesting. I think we need to conclude. I would like to do it by thanking you for extremely insightful conversation. I think it was full of leads to all of us, to my organization, but also to scientists in the room. Thank you so much. And I would like to ask you to join me in the big applaud for their contribution. Thank you.